I think there's an awful lot of people who want to see that public relationship between you and him rekindled.
Well, it hasn't. I mean, to my eye, it has not been broken. I mean, I like Jordan. I mean, I think this is what I imagine, because I have not had any dialogue with him in a couple of years. But I mean, Jordan and I disagree fundamentally about religion, I think, and we've debated that, ad nauseum. I mean, we've probably got like 12 hours, on the mic in various venues debating that, and that was fun. And I'm always happy to talk to him. And I think while we disagree, I think he has really helped millions of people. I mean, I think there's no question. I know what it's like to be with him at an event and to hear from the people who are, hear from his fans and my fans side by side, sitting at a table for an hour after an event where we, had a debate in front of 8,000 people. And there's a slightly different flavor to the people whose lives we've changed, right? He's intersected with a different group of people at a different point in their lives than I have, for the most part.
How would you categorize that difference?
Well, I mean, to a significant degree, it's people moving in two opposite directions. I mean, like they're the people who were stuck with a religious worldview, I mean, literally in many cases, traumatized by a fear of hell that had been inculcated into them by their religious parents, but were enamored enough of Enlightenment values and secular rationality and science so as to have the spell break to some significant degree, and they needed some language to help kind of midwife their delivery into the clear light of reason, right? And they also needed. So, and this is where Richard and I have had different jobs. I mean, Richard is just critiquing religion and counterposing it with all that's wonderful about science, right? And so for him, the spiritual attitude that is on offer once you leave religion behind and close the church doors behind you is awe at the beauty of nature and just amazement at everything we are learning and may yet learn about the way the world works and the way the mind works. And I mean, we are, to use Newton's image, I mean, it's like we are children on a seashore playing with shells, and the vast ocean of ignorance and potential knowledge, it just awaits our inspection. For me, that's not good enough, right? What I mean by spirituality has in fact nothing to do with the amazement that you feel when you look up at the Milky Way, right? It's like that's great, but that's just not the real opportunity on offer, and that's not what's going to prepare us to die, and that's not what's going to really console you at 4 a.m. when you wake up feeling bad about your life and not sure how you can be happy in this world, right? So I'm convinced that at the core of every religion, there were real transformative and transcendent human experiences that are attested to by the literature and traditions that have grown up around that religion. So there really was, presumably there really was a person, in history by the name of Jesus who had this effect on the people around him and said, something like what he is purported to have said in the Bible. And I can understand all of that as an absolutely predictable result of certain ways of paying attention that are available to every human being now, then and now, which allow you to recognize that this ego you take yourself to be is an illusion, and it allows you to recognize that unconditional love is actually a possibility, right? Like it's possible to just feel shattered by your love for all sentient beings, and to bask in the profundity of that way of being. And that's on the menu. And whether you have to go into a cave and meditate for a month to find that, or you take MDMA, or there are ways to perturb your nervous system such that the testimony of someone like Jesus or Buddha is obviously not a fraud. It's obviously not a confession of psychopathology. It's obviously not a delusion about belief-based delusion about what happens after death, or about invisible parts of the universe, and populated by angels or deities. You don't have to believe in anything unempirical in order to experience that range of positive experience. You just have to learn to use your attention in the right ways, and if you can't do that, there are psychedelics offer an imperfect method for glimpsing that. Yeah, I mean it's definitely reliable. It's a reliable glimpse of something that is different enough. Assuming you have a positive experience. I mean, you can have a different enough negative experience that will convince you of something else. But if you have a different enough, extraordinarily positive experience, you'll be convinced that, okay, whatever the possibilities of sustaining that may or may not be, it is just clear that this experience is possible because I just had it, right? I just had it for 4 hours. And I can no longer imagine that human consciousness is in principle confined to kind of the mediocre bandwidth I tend to experience when I'm just checking my email and then checking Twitter and then worrying about my future. Right? I actually don't think I actually closed the loop on what I wanted to say about Jordan there, though. So Jordan and I differ in he wants to support a much more traditional picture of the utility and even necessity of religious thinking and religious identity, and that way of giving meaning to one's life through traditional stories and stories which I think a literal belief in can't be justified based on what we have come to understand about science. And I just think that the burden is on us at this point in history to find a truly non-sectarian way of telling ourselves a story about what we value and what is possible, right? And we do that in other areas of our lives. I mean, science is one very clear place we do that, where there is no to say that there's American science versus Chinese science. I mean, that's just not science. Science is at a layer more fundamental than those cultural differences. And so it has to be with something like ethics and spirituality. You can't talk in the end. You shouldn't be able to talk about Christian ethics or Christian spiritual insight. And Jordan's not convinced of that, or he's apparently not convinced of that. And so that's what we still disagree about. But I think the thing I wanted to say was that. So you seem to allude to some sort of breach between us, which I certainly don't feel and haven't experienced. I can only imagine, though, that in his world, given what was happening to me on Twitter when I left, he perceives me as somebody who has just gone off the rails in some way, right? Because he in his world, and this is what was so amazing to see. When I was looking at Twitter, if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, there was this whole Hunter Biden laptop situation where I commented on the Hunter Biden laptop thing on a podcast. A clip from that podcast got exported to apparently every planet in the solar system, and it had an enormous effect right of center. Right, so right of center, I had just destroyed my career. Right, literally, I'm hearing from people like, oh my God, are you okay? Right. And in my world and in every channel I care about, literally nothing had happened. Right. And so, Jordan lives in the world where I just kind of torched everything. So I can only imagine that he has some view of the truth is, I would expect him to be genuinely confused about what I believe about things like free speech or any of the relevant variables there. Unless he happens to listen to my podcast, which, I don't know whether or not he does.
I think the potential breach that I was talking about was more just that there is a hunger for you and him to speak. I think that you've both been formative to a lot of people's intellectual journeys in one form or another. And I think people are hoping that there is yet more juice to squeeze from your conjoined lemons in however way that happens.
Well, I'm always happy to talk to him. I think the thing that got into my head is someone sent me a clip from Joe Rogan's podcast where he and Joe were talking about me, and Jordan seemed to be talking about me as like a cautionary tale, like look what can happen to somebody, and Joe said something like, "Oh, I still have hope for Sam," and they're, in my view, they are in this contrarian echo chamber, right? Where mRNA vaccines are terrifying, COVID was no big deal, January 6th was maybe a non-event, right? The libtards are trying to ruin everything. And there's a whole picture of sort of audience capture and information skewing there, which I understand. I mean, that's sort of like if I look to my left, I can see all that. But if you're only there, there's just a lot of half truths, kind of ricocheting around that echo chamber. Which, I mean, I'm happy to talk to both those guys, but it's just they're not in the lane I'm in and trying to maintain, despite crosswinds, trying to maintain a straight course in. That's only half the story, right? So it's and I just think people are genuinely confused now because two things are true. We have lost trust in the normal channels of information and normal institutions post-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID. For obvious reasons, but we desperately need institutions and a media that we can trust, right? And we're not going to navigate this moment by just proliferating podcasts and newsletters, right? It's just not good enough.
Much as we might try.
Yeah.
In other news, this episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep's pod cover is keeping me alive in the middle of summer in Austin, Texas at the moment. Good sleep is the ultimate game changer, and being too hot or too cold is a guaranteed way to ruin your night's sleep. The pod cover from 8 Sleep will actively cool and heat each different side of the bed based on yours and your partner's sleep stages. It is a complete game changer, and if you're waking up in the morning feeling groggy and not sufficiently rested, it is quite likely that temperature is the culprit, and all of this is fixed with the pod cover from 8 Sleep. It slips over the top of your existing mattress just like a mattress topper, but gives you all of the biometric scanning. It'll tell you how long you're asleep for, your resting heart rate, your HRV, everything literally from a mattress topper. Head to 8sleep.com/modernwisdom or follow the link in the show notes below for $150 off, plus they ship internationally. That's EIGHT sleep.com/modernwisdom.